It's a very gripping series, whether you've watched it or not. Just hearing about it is kind of gripping and thought-provoking. And if something like that is on your mind, I think it's a great opportunity to try to see what the Torah has to say on related topics. The real question is, why discuss it at all? Why try to connect it to Torah? And that is why I threw in a few sources right here. The first source I want to mention is a source from the Mishnah in Avos, often translated as Ethics of the Fathers. And in that source, Yehuda ben Tema says, "Be bold as a leopard, light as an eagle, swift as a deer, and strong as a lion to carry out the will of your Father in heaven." And I think this is a very interesting thing for Yehuda ben Tema to say, because the shorter version of the same exact message is be bold, be swift, be light, be strong. And that's really all we should need to hear. Why does Yehuda ben Tema say be bold as a leopard, light as an eagle, swift as a deer? Why is it necessary to bring in the entire National Geographic range of animals into this Mishnah? If the message is being bold, being light, being swift, why is it necessary to mention all these animals? Anyone have any thoughts? Asaf, what do you think? Do you think that this Mishnah would be just as good without the leopard, eagle, deer, and lion? Just saying, be bold, be light, be swift, be strong.
Yeah.
Okay, so it must be that the Torah wants you to look at the world around you and learn. It's saying be bold is not the same thing as saying be bold like that leopard that you just saw on a YouTube video when you should have been working, right? Because one is just like, okay, be bold, be strong. Okay, fine, I'll try to write that down somewhere. Another is bringing things that you've experienced, that you've seen, that you've heard of to life and saying, did you ever hear a lion roar? Do you ever get a sense of that strength? That is what you should try to muster in your inner strengths when you're supposed to be waking up in the morning and you're super tired and you're like, oh, I can't do this. Try to picture that lion who's roaring and getting up and say, I'm going to get up because I have a big day in front of me and great things to accomplish. Looking at the world around us is what God wants us to do, and to learn from things in the world around us. These animals aren't even kosher animals. These aren't Torah concept. These are just things in the world around us, things that we experience. Take those experiences and see how you can take them and apply them to your everyday life. The next source is in Eruvin. It says that if the Torah had not been given to us by the Almighty, we would have learned modesty from a cat and refraining from thievery from an ant. This is a similar kind of concept. There are morals, things that the Torah teaches us, which we could have learned from the world around us, because a Jew is supposed to be conscious of the world around us and mindful of the world around us, and take everything that we experience and everything that we see and try to learn from that experience and gain throughout life, so that we're not just experiencing life, but growing through life and gaining new understandings. Similarly, the Mishnah in Avos says, who is wise? He who learns from every person, not just from a rabbi or a teacher or a master, but from every encounter you have with another human being. There's something you can learn. And finally, the Talmud says, what is a short verse upon which all the fundamentals of Torah depend? It is this: know him in all your ways. The verse in Mishlei says you should know God in all your ways. That means that God is not meant to be something that you encounter whenever you happen to be in shul, be it twice a year, be it every single Shabbat, be it every single day. No matter how often you are in these places, in a place of Torah study, in a book of Torah study, that is not the only places where you're supposed to be encountering God. You're supposed to be encountering God in all your ways, in everything you're doing, be it at work, be it at home, and be it even in your forms of entertainment. So if we have a powerful Netflix show, I think that's a great opportunity to see, what is it that we can learn from this show? What what positive things can we learn? What negative things should we learn also to be wary of? And that is why I think this is an important topic. And I hope you'll agree definitely once we see some of these sources. So topics to explore. The things I want to discuss are, first, the salesman. Second, fact or fiction. Third, 45.6 billion won. Fourth, why we watch Squid Game. And fifth, timeless ethics. And it is not necessary to have watched Squid Game in order to gain from every single one of these topics. And I will try to give brief explanations or context behind the different things that we're saying. If I will mention something that is a major spoiler, I will try to remember to give a warning. If I forget, I do apologize in advance. So the basic idea of the game, I'm sure anyone on this call probably knows, but just to make sure, is that there is a game being played on an island somewhere. It's a series of kids games. Anyone who is eliminated from the game is literally eliminated, and the prize money goes to the last person standing. So that's the basic idea. And the salesman, the first thing I want to discuss is this guy who approaches people who are out of luck, going through hard times financially, and he offers them an offer that they cannot resist. He says he wants to play a very simple children's game with them right there. This happens to be in a train station. He wants to play a simple children's game with them. And if the player wins, he gets a wad of cash. And if the player loses, the salesman has a right to slap him across the face. So I want to open a question up to anyone here. What would you say? If someone offered you a nice amount of cash, and the only downside was if you lost this game, you got slapped, would you take the offer or not?
I think it just depends on what we're playing for if I win.
If you win.
Easy yes
Okay.
for me.
Easy yes, who was that?
Max, easy yes for
Max.
me.
Oh, easy yes, okay. And Sam, what you're saying depends on what you win. You win a stack of cash.
I guess it's a yes then. That if all it takes is just a slap if I lose.
Yeah, okay, I'd agree. Okay, now we're going to jump back to a few more sources. These are the last sources for today. And I want you to bear with me because this is going to be relevant, even though at the beginning it does not sound relevant. Okay, this is from Bereshit, from Genesis. It is the story of Isaac, of Abraham looking for a wife for his son Yitzchak, Isaac. And he is speaking to his servant Eliezer. He wants to send him on a mission to find a wife for his son. And he tells him he wants him to travel to a distant country where certain relatives of his live, and he wants him to bring a wife for his son from those relatives. And Eliezer turns to Abraham and says, well, what if this girl that I find doesn't want to travel back with me? He's trying to raise different issues that can come up with this trip, different technical difficulties. And Abraham brushes him away with every one of those things and says, don't worry, it'll be okay. He heads down. Sure enough, he finds the girl, and he finds the perfect girl for Isaac. And when he's talking to the girl's family, he tells them the whole story, how Abraham sent him to go. And he told Abraham that, what happens if the girl does not want to come back with me. So the verse where he's telling over this story to Rebecca, to Rivka, to Rebecca's family, is right here, Genesis 24:39. Eliezer says, I said to my master, but what if the girl will not come back with me? Okay, he's presenting a potential technical difficulty that can arise. What happens if this girl that he finds for Isaac will not want to return? Now, if you look at the Hebrew, it's written a little bit funny. It says, Va'omar ladoni, I said to my master, Ulai lo telech ha'isha acharai. And I'm sure definitely Asaph notices here, but you might also notice if you're familiar with Hebrew, Ulai should be spelled with a vav. Right, Asaf? I saw a nod. Okay, good. We're on the right track. So it's spelled, the Torah seemingly misspells the word ulai. Ulai means maybe, perhaps. Okay, so whenever you have some issue with the text, the first person to be sensitive to that will be Rashi. So Rashi is the commentary at the bottom of the Chumash, and he only speaks up when there's something that should be bothering you in the text. And sure enough, Rashi here says Rashi, it, meaning the word ulai, what if, is written without a vav and may be read elai. If you spell the word ulai, which means perhaps, without a vav, it means to me. Explains Rashi, Eliezer had a daughter, and he was looking for a pretext so that Avraham would turn to him and tell him to marry off his daughter to Yitzchak. So there's a backstory going on. Eliezer is being told to go out to a far country to find a wife for Isaac. Eliezer's like, go to a far country to find a wife? I have a daughter who's perfect, absolutely perfect. Shouldn't Isaac marry my daughter? So for that reason, he's starting to bring up all these potential technical difficulties that might arise with the trip, hoping that Abraham will say, you know what, you're right. The traveling is way too hard. Too many things can go wrong. Let's just have him marry your daughter. Everything will be okay. So that means that he has a personal bias here that's causing him to raise questions. So when he's telling over this story, he says, I said, ulai, lo telech haisha. I said, perhaps she will not come after me and return to Isaac. But really, I was saying, Eli, to me, really, I want Isaac to come to my household, marry my daughter. So Eliezer is explaining to the family that he really had an ulterior motive that was causing him to try to come up with issues with the trip. Okay? I hope that made sense. But what's really strange is if you look at the third source in this slide, that is when the story is actually taking place. And Eliezer is turning to Abraham when Abraham's trying to send him off, not when he's telling over the story later. When Eliezer's being sent off, he turns to Abraham and he says, what if the girl will not come back with me? The same quote that he was quoting here when he was telling over the story later, when it was actually happening, if you look at the Hebrew, ulai is spelled perfectly. Aleph, Vav, Lamed, Yud, ulai means maybe, what if? It does not say Elai, hinting at an ulterior motive. So why is it that when the story was actually taking place, we don't see any alternative motive, and only when it's being recounted later, we see some sort of hidden motive going on? And the reason is, perhaps you can guess this yourself as well, when something is going on, when we're in the thick of things, we have a very hard time being aware of our motives. We usually have a personal bias, but we are unaware of it at the time. We think we're making a perfect judgment. We know what we're doing. We know what we're saying. It's only sometimes later, in this point, when he found the perfect wife for Isaac, and he no longer thinks Isaac should marry his daughter, then he's able to look back in retrospect and say, you know what? I wasn't asking those questions because I was worried about the travels. I was asking those questions because I wanted him to go to my daughter, right? Only in hindsight, he was able to realize that the entire time there was a personal bias that was clouding his vision and clouding his ability to see the situation the way it actually was. And this is a very important message because so many of our decisions are clouded by personal bias and we are totally unaware that the bias exists. And that's why when we're trying to make decisions, it's very important to have someone outside of ourselves who we can ask whether we're about to make a good decision or not, because we ourselves should not be trusted with these kinds of decisions. So the salesman in Squid Game is what we call in Judaism the Yetzer Hara, often translated as the evil inclination, but it has nothing to do with evil. It is just the aspect of ourselves that comes and gives us ideas that deep down we don't truly want, but plays on the fact that we have a personal bias that's not allowing us to see the situation clearly. So for instance, if I have an issue with sugar and therefore I'm trying to stay away from sugar and I see a really delicious chocolate cake, I will look at the chocolate cake and think, you know what? A chocolate cake never hurt anyone. If I'm eating sugar every single day, then I'll be at risk. But this one piece of chocolate cake, if I just take a little bit, it's not really going to make a difference, right? And that part of me that's trying to convince me that that's probably a good idea, we like to think of as like a separate entity, even though it's not, it's just a part of me. And we call it the Yetzer Hara. And that's exactly what's going on right here. Okay. If we hear like, oh, you'll get lots of money and the only downside is a slap, sure, great, why not? But if we had a moment to stop and think, 1 second, the guy's walking up to me with this beautiful, sleek hair, perfect suit, looking like $1,000,000, spending his time, spending lots and lots of money. Is this actually safe? Or is this absolutely totally creepy? Okay, there's no way that anything normal is going on here. There's no way that anything safe is going on here. But whenever we hear the offer, we're like, yeah, sure, yeah, you get some cash. It's the fact that there's a whole bunch of cash on the line that's not allowing us to see the situation for what it is. Absolutely, totally nuts. The answer is no. Run. If this ever happens to you, which it's not going to, run in the opposite direction. But it's very realistic that Jihan here, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is not able to see beyond the cash. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I don't need to think about this too much. I'm going to get a bunch of cash. It'll be fine. Right? So this is just a great metaphor for life, because so many of the decisions that we make are totally clouded by our bias. And it's very good to have someone that we can bounce things off of and say, should I really be having this chocolate cake now? I'm thinking like it's totally fine. It'll motivate me to be even healthier, whatever. And whoever you're talking to will usually roll his eyes and say, let me put the chocolate cake somewhere where you can't reach and let's move on, right? So this is just an example. Chocolate cake is a silly example, but it's basically about so many important decisions that we make: who we're going to marry, what job we should take, where we should live. All these things are clouded by things that should not be influencing our decisions, by personal bias that should not be part of the equation. And having someone we trust who we can bounce these things off of is absolutely crucial. So I think is just an important side note to take out from the salesman in Squid Game. This part has a lot to do with my personal opinion. So if you wish to disagree, that is totally fine. But a big risk when watching fictional movies and TV series, TV shows, whatever it may be, is that we are totally at the mercy of the director of the show. Without even realizing it, we learn things about life from the movies that we watch. We learn things about human behavior from the movies that we watch. We learn things about how the world runs from the movies we watch. Even though we know that the movies that we're watching are totally a work of fiction and just an artistic creation of the director and the producer and all the people involved, we still allow ourselves to sit back, relax, watch the show, and walk away having gained insights that are actually disconnected from reality, but still stay with us because our brain was tricked into seeing them as reality. And an example of this is in the Squid Game, after the first game, where they suddenly realize that elimination means actual elimination and how high the stakes actually are. And they decide to take a vote on whether to end the games or to continue the games. And the rule is, for those that didn't watch, you can only end the games if a majority of the players vote to end them. And sure enough, by one vote, it is decided that they're going to end the games. And this is actually a picture of, pressing the vote for ending the game. And everyone goes back to their lives. And the way the story works is that their lives are so difficult and so miserable that almost everyone ends up back in the games. So they were kind of almost sort of tricked into these games. But then even after realizing the true stakes of the game, once they went back to their lives and realized how miserable their lives actually are, most of the players opted to come back because even the chance of a better future was worth more than the absolute total ridiculous risk of 1 in several hundred of making it out of these games alive. And the message that you get from the game is how desperate people are and the measures people are willing to take in order to desperately try to change their situation. But this is one of these examples where it's so important to remember this is absolute fiction. And I personally, you can disagree with this part, but I personally do not believe that in real life, barely anyone would return to the game. A few people might return, mostly people who unfortunately have some sort of chemical imbalance that's going with the desperate times that they're going through, meaning if they're suffering from depression or things like that. I think definitely some might return, but this idea that most of the players will return, we walk away from the series with having learned something about humanity, about the measures people are willing to take, about the value of human life. But in reality, people value their lives much more than the show tries to portray. And people will say, you know, my life is absolutely miserable. My life is absolutely horrible, but I am not going back there, because in the end of the day, life is that valuable. So I think it's just an important thing to remember. Life is extremely valuable and people understand the value of life. And it was great for the plot that everyone returned, but separating fact from fiction is important because we end up walking away with a twisted view of humanity and twisted view of the actual value of life. And on that note, I want to talk about 45.6 billion won. Won is not what people won, but the currency, the Korean currency that they are getting the cash in. I believe it's something like $37 million or something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a lot of money. And the message of the show, like we just said, is how people are in such desperate, terrible situations. Their lives are absolutely miserable, that they're willing to put their lives on the line for the chance of making tons and tons of money. And it's a social commentary also about the disparities in society and how miserable these people's lives actually are. But I want to ask the following question. Why 45.6 billion won? Why not 1 billion won, right? Why $37 million? Why not $1 million? Or, you know what? Why didn't Netflix have this game be not about $1 million, but about $700,000? Wouldn't that be a great plot? Whole bunch of people are absolutely miserable. Jihan has these mafia loan sharks chasing him, making him sign with his blood that, you know, get out of this situation. All these people are absolutely, the lady who fled North Korea, they're all in absolute miserable situations. They need a lot of money to get out of their situations. Wouldn't $700,000 change all these people's lives? Wouldn't Jihan be able to retain custody of his daughter if he had $700,000? Not 37 million, but 700,000, or let's say 1 million. Why did Netflix decide to make the show about 45.6 billion won? The answer is because making the show about $700,000 is not realistic, because no matter how, like we said before, no matter how miserable people's lives are, they are not going to enter a game with a 1 in 400 chance of dying, of surviving, just to fix their problems. So the message Netflix wants you to get is that people who are hugely in debt and are in an absolute rut, their lives are so miserable, they're willing to put their lives on the line to change the situation. But that's not really what's happening in the plot. That would have been if the plot was about $700,000. If the plot is about $36 million, and that's the only way the plot would have been realistic, that's because the reason why these players are playing is not to fix their situation, but to become rich. It's not about just fixing my problems of yesterday, but creating a new future in which I am rich, because right now I am miserable. And if I won this game, I would not be miserable. Not that I would not be miserable because I fixed my technical problems that I've been living with, but I would not be miserable because now I am a rich person. Okay? The irony of this whole plot is that you suddenly realize, if you think about it, that there's no real difference between the players and the VIPs. So just to explain, there are VIPs who come to watch these games. They're the people who are funding these games, and they're coming to watch these games. These games are being run for the entertainment of the super wealthy. And what we learn towards the end of the series, is that the super wealthy are absolutely desperate because they are bored out of their minds and they don't know what to do with themselves. And that is why they created the games, in order to have a little bit of entertainment, in order to feel alive, as is said at the end of the series. Okay? So they have absolutely no meaning in life. They're definitely not happy. They're miserable. They create these games in order to make life interesting. Okay? I'm about to, spoiler alert. If you do not want to hear spoilers, please turn off your your speaker for 60 seconds. Okay, so you have all these different players, and you have player number one. And at the end of the series, you hear that there's a total difference between all the players and player number one, because player number one, Ilnam, I think his name is, player number one is actually not really, he's actually the person who's arranging the entire games, and he is super wealthy. He's not desperate, and he's in the games because he's dying and he wants to have his last little bit of fun in his life before he goes. And you think at the end, you realize that the entire time they were all these desperate players, and he was a super wealthy guy who was just having a good time. But it's not true. He is just as desperate as they are. That is why he is there. There's total desperation from every different direction. And that is connected to the holiday of Sukkot that we just had. The holiday of Sukkot, interestingly enough, is called the time of our happiness. Every time it's mentioned in prayers, we say Zman Simchatenu, the time of our happiness. And it doesn't seem like the happiest of holidays. It's rather a holiday of discomfort. Instead of being in our big villas, sitting, lounging on our sofas, we go out to this meager little shed outside with the covering of the shed is made out of basically nothing, like chopped up pieces of wood or something like that, or leaves. And we go out there and we say, this is Zman Simchatenu, this is the time of our happiness. How is it the time of our happiness? The way Sukkot is the time of our happiness is because Sukkot is the only holiday where every single thing you do can be a mitzvah. If you sleep in the sukkah, that's a mitzvah. If you eat in the sukkah, it's a mitzvah. If you sit down and have a talk with someone in the sukkah, it's a mitzvah. If you read the paper in the sukkah, it's a mitzvah. The most mundane things in life suddenly have meaning and purpose when you're sitting in the sukkah, because you are doing them as part of a mitzvah. And what that is there to teach us is that we actually have the ability to turn every single thing we do in life into a mitzvah, into something meaningful. If you wake up in the morning and you have a bowl of cereal, that can either be the most mundane thing you do that day, or it can be the most meaningful thing you do that day. The question is, why you're eating the cereal. If you're eating the cereal because you saw an ad for cereal and it looked good, then it's mundane. It's pretty much meaningless. If you're eating the cereal because you need a quick breakfast so you can get out and be productive and do good things in the world, then that cereal is the most meaningful thing or not the most meaningful, but a very meaningful thing that you're starting your day with. Mundane things do not need to be mundane. You can imbue them with meaning. And the way we achieve happiness in life is through meaning. Making our lives meaningful is how we become happy. And a great way to do that is with money, with wealth. Money and wealth are great things if they're there for a purpose. If they're part of a bigger picture of leading meaningful lives, then you can use your wealth in order to be active in meaningful ways and do meaningful things. And that is how you become happy. So that's why it's called the holiday of our happiness, because it's a holiday that's training us. It's a happiness training seminar. That's what that holiday is. Training to turn everything you do into meaningful things. And that is a really, something to think about when you watch Squid Game. Is the narrative that you're being fed is, look how desperate these people are, and the wealth gap makes all these people on the bottom miserable. But an even more important message is, they're not playing in order to become, to get out of their misery. They're playing in order to become rich because they think that's going to make them happy, and that doesn't work. And it's built into the game. It's embedded into the series that doesn't work. because, and again, this is a spoiler, but this one will take 30 seconds if you want to turn off your speakers. But we have the side plot, the subplot with the policeman, the detective looking for his brother. And who was the brother? So there's this guy who comes onto the island looking for his long lost brother. It turns out the brother is a player who won in one of the previous games. And now he's part of the VIPs watching the games because he ended up in the same boat of desperation. He has all the money he could ever spend. And now what? His life is meaningless and he's looking for some sort of entertainment to make him feel alive, he ended up in the same desperate situation because the players are chasing something that they're not going to find even if they win the game. And the VIPs are there as witness, as testimony to the fact that they're chasing the wrong thing. And in our lives, we do the exact same thing. We constantly focus, if only I got this raise in my career, then I would be happy. But we don't think, why do I want the raise in the career? And how can I actually make this a meaningful thing? And that's why when we get the raise, we're not happy. When we get the dream job, we're not happy. When we manage to buy the dream car, we're not happy. We might be happy for a few hours or maybe a few days, but when it stops smelling like the plastic and like the car shop, eventually we start seeing someone with a fancier car and we start saying, oh, if only I had that car, then I would achieve the happiness. We are chasing something that will constantly escape us because it is built off of a mistaken premise. The next thing I want to discuss is why we watch Squid Game. So when you watch Squid Game and you see the VIPs walking in there in order to watch so many people get brutally murdered, and it's so revolting. This is a picture of them walking in with their golden face masks, and it's just disgusting to think that this is a form of entertainment. They're coming, hello Emily, this is a form of entertainment that they're totally okay with being entertained by watching such terrible, horrible violence. Okay, an interesting thing to think about is we understand why in the plot the games are so violent, but why is it that when Netflix makes a series on the plot, the Netflix series themselves are also so violent? You can have the same exact story as the Squid Game without needing to watch all the violence. You can, just like when Ilnam was allegedly killed, you didn't see him get shot. We can have that with all the other players. You can see lots and lots of shooting, and then you can see all the bodies strewn on the floor. Why do we need to watch people as they're getting shot with the red, whatever they use for the show to make it look realistic, or even, I don't even think it looks, I mean, it's like hyper red in this one. Why do we need to watch all that happening in front of our eyes? Wouldn't Netflix actually save a lot of money if they just had all those things happen just beyond the view of the person watching the show? I think everyone realizes that's a ridiculous question, because the show would not be as successful as it is if not for the shock factor of having people sit there and watch, having us watch this Netflix show and watch person after person get eliminated. And it's just like numbing. The sheer volume of death in this series is absolutely numbing, that your brain can barely even process it. And eventually you just don't, you like stop feeling anything. And the people just turn into, oh, wow, another person down. I guess Jihan has more chances of survival now. I guess there's more money in the bank account now. You end up becoming not so different from the VIPs, except that you are watching fiction and they are in the plot are watching, real violence. And the question to ponder is, how deep and how significant is the difference between real violence and fake violence? Everyone on this call has been to a Shabbos table and they've seen how we cover the challahs before we say hamotzi. And why is it that we cover the challahs before we see this beautiful blue challah cover? Anyone know why we cover the challah before we say hamotzi? Let me tell you. We cover the challahs because, generally speaking, if we have wine and we have challah, we should start with the challah first, because challah is considered more important than wine. But on Shabbat, we're not supposed to start our meal without first making kiddush on wine. So we ignore the challahs and we start with the wine. But now we have an issue. The challah is going to watch us make kiddush on wine and say, wait a minute, shouldn't I go first? And it's going to be totally embarrassed that we're ignoring it and going for the wine first. So we cover it so that it won't see what we're doing. Is that cute? Isn't that the sweetest thing? It's really, really sweet, but it also makes no sense because I don't think we would be cutting the challahs with a challah knife if it was that sensitive, right? Talk about offense. We then take the challah knife and we chop it into pieces. Challahs do not have feelings, contrary to popular belief. Why are we covering the challah so that, quote unquote, it won't be embarrassed when challahs cannot be embarrassed? They are inanimate objects that happen to taste really, really good if you're by the Garfinkel's, right? Why do we cover it? And the answer is the same reason why someone who is practicing punching punches a punching bag. And you say, why are you punching this punching bag? And he says, well, don't you know, we live in Chicago. There's lots and lots of dark alleys in Chicago where you can meet someone who is dangerous and I have to practice my punching. And you say, I feel so bad for you because you probably don't realize that you're never going to encounter a punching bag in a dark alley. So you're practicing on the wrong thing. Find bad people who are trying to attack you and punch them. But the answer is no. In order to react properly in a situation of danger, you need to practice on a punching bag, because then if you practice enough, you will be ready for a real life encounter. And that is exactly what we're doing with the challah. Torah wants to teach us sensitivity. We need to be sensitive people. It's not just about whether we're going to be actively mean to other people. We need to be sensitive to other people's plight. We need to be sensitive to the world around us. That is why we practice sensitivity on inanimate objects, so that when we have real life encounters, we are a little bit more ready to react properly. It's an important thing that we actually do in our house. It might sound ridiculous, but when we have an Alexa device, I am downstairs so I can say her name without activating my smart home and making the entire house go crazy. So when we ask Alexa for things, in my family, the kids always know you say, Alexa, please, can you turn on the lights? Alexa, please, can you raise the temperature? Even though Alexa does not care whether we are polite, but practicing with an inanimate object makes us that more likely to have a better interaction with a real human being. So this is because the Torah says, we're supposed to go in God's way. We're supposed to come as mitzvahs are supposed to make us as godlike as possible. That means that we're supposed to become more compassionate as people, not just behave in compassionate ways, but be a more compassionate person. We are supposed to become refined as human beings, have a finer sensitivity to the plight of other human beings around us. So I want to quote a very interesting article that I saw in the USA Today, which is directly relevant to this point. And the writer says the following: all over the world, people can't stop talking about Squid Game, Netflix's brutal, disturbing horror series. But why? There's a little bit of skipping here, but even before Squid Game, there's MMA boxing. People used to watch witches being burnt at the stake. We often don't, auto de fe, when Jews were being burnt in Spain for the crime of practicing Judaism in secret. And, everyone used to come watch. We often don't like to admit it, but watching this kind of stuff has always been a part of our humanity. That's an important sentence. Watching this kind of stuff has always been a part of our humanity. What is so appealing about Squid Game? According to Glenn Sparks, a professor in the Brian Lamb School of Communication at Purdue University, scary shows can provide a form of escapism from our ordinary, relatively civilized lives. Seeing 200 people shot to death in an episode of Squid Game isn't pleasant to watch, but it provides a jolt of stimulation. This kind of entertainment presents things we cannot see in our everyday life experiences. And to a certain extent, human beings are wired to pay attention to things that are novel, he says. We'll kind of be like, oh man, is that cool? I've never seen anything like that. And we derive some fulfillment from seeing things that are different. Is it desensitizing us to violence? There isn't anything wrong with enjoying some gore, says the author, but experts worry about the unprecedented success of this untraditional entertainment. Glenn Sparks fears the professor quoted before, fears the rising popularity of this type of gruesome content that fears the rising popularity of this kind of gruesome content may desensitize people to real life violence and tragedy. The bold here is by me, not in the article. One 2016 study found those who were repeatedly exposed to high levels of televised violence exhibited less empathy and emotional reactivity to real life violence, a finding that he calls concerning, right? So this study is a very interesting study. I can send out the link for anyone who wants to read it. But they find that exposing ourselves to high levels of televised violence causes us to have less empathy and emotional reactivity to real life violence. So there's a connection between fictional things that we watch and our response to real life things. As people consume more and more of this kind of graphic content, we may as a culture grow more numb to the way most people would react to violence, and our constant exposure may be leading to that, he says. However, Jordan notes, while Squid Game may have a desensitizing effect, it doesn't lead to violent behavior. This is the thing you'll most often hear quoted, that there's no scientifically proven connection between watching violent shows and actual violence, meaning, everyone's worried that the kids who are watching all these shows will become more violent behavior. There's no study to prove that. So that, he says, should cause us to not worry about this too much, right? While Squid Game may have a desensitizing effect, it doesn't lead to violent behavior. People make this assumption that if you react to something like a death on the news with less emotion or sensitivity, that's going to translate into an action. But that's not necessarily true, Jordan says. There's a big difference between people's attitudes and their actions. So the reason why society doesn't worry about these things too much is because society is very worried about an uptick in crime versus no uptick in crime. And there's no scientific proof that watching these kinds of shows cause an uptick in crime. So all is good and well, except that we don't worry just about upticks in crime. We worry about our personal sensitivity. We should see that as an important factor as well. So that's just a thing to keep in mind, that we have to make sure that we don't get desensitized by shows like this. So there's nothing wrong with looking away when there's a gory scene on the TV in front of us. We should not feel embarrassed to do that. It's actually good for our souls to either watch Mary Poppins instead, or while we're watching things like Squid Game, we do not have to stare at every single gory detail, because we end up falling to a similar trap as the VIPs. Obviously, you cannot compare watching actual real live people getting killed for entertainment, but there is an element of that timeless element of the human psyche enjoying watching these kinds of scenes that we should try to refrain from, because it's not healthy for our souls. The final thing I want to discuss is timeless ethics, and with that we will end. And it's really going back to a sentence that she said in her article that really caught my eye. She says, even before Squid Game, there's MMA boxing, people used to watch witches being burnt at the stake. We often don't like to admit it, but watching this kind of stuff has always been part of our humanity. And that is true. Humanity in general has always enjoyed watching violent things take place. We spoke about the auto de fe in Spain. If we're already talking about Spain, the watching people fight a bullfighting, where either the person himself can get terribly injured, or you're just watching an animal get ripped to shreds for entertainment purposes, is something that has always been part of our humanity. And the article presents this as, okay, that's who we are. But it's an important thing to think about as members of the Jewish people. We can actually say that when the entire Rome would head over to the Colosseum in order to watch a bunch of slaves being forced to fight each other to death, like the gladiators, which a lot of this genre is trying, Hunger Games and Squid Game and others are trying to kind of, tap into that idea of the gladiators, where you have different people that are forced to fight each other to death for the entertainment of the spectators. And, it's always been part of humanity. The entire Rome thought that was an absolutely totally fine, normal thing, just like the VIPs. They saw nothing wrong with it, because these are slaves who were captured in the war. We could have just killed them in the war, but that would be such a waste. Instead of killing them then, let's bring them, at least provide entertainment for people. It's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. They were unable, because society told them that is okay. Citizens of Rome were unable to go against the entire way of thinking of the entire the world as they knew it at the time, they said, okay, they grew up understanding that's okay. So it's okay for them also, just always been part of humanity, as she said. But at the same time, there was a Jewish neighbor on that block who wasn't deciding what his morals and what his values were based on what everyone else on the street was saying, but he was tapping into this timeless thing called the Torah that he had gotten from his parents, or gotten from their parents. And the Torah said that even if the entire Rome is going to watch this game, that is absolutely horrifyingly disgusting and revolting, and they would not go, because the same ethics and morals and same things that we believe in now, we believed in then, and we were never part of that. Unfortunately, we were part of it to an extent in the arena, being forced as captives from Jerusalem to participate in some of the games, but never as spectators. There actually, aside for a certain period in time where there were some Jewish spectators who were there in order to try to sway the vote, there were certain stories about captives who the crowd was supposed to vote on whether they should be saved or not saved. So there was a little bit of participation there, but never as spectators going for entertainment purposes, because that is, and this is not because we're better than the rest of the world. It's not because the Jewish citizens of Rome were somehow better people, or of a higher stock or a better race or anything like that. There's nothing to do with that. It's just because they were tapping into something called the Torah, which was providing them with timeless wisdom and timeless morals that were not subject to the winds of time. And that is a very powerful thing to think about, that we have access to something that is not subject to winds of time, because when we are subject to winds of time, we have a very hard time seeing clearly whether something is actually right or wrong, because we tend to measure whether something is right or wrong based on the reaction that we would get. Let's say on Twitter, if I write this on Twitter, if everyone's going to be upset at me, that means it's wrong. And if not, that means it's right. And often that's true, but not always that's true. That is not really how we should be gauging our morals. So it's just, an important moment of Jewish pride. When you read a sentence like that says this has always been part of our humanity, we can actually look in the mirror and say, no, not part of our humanity. We never were part of anything like that. And hopefully we should continue to have the backbone to hold a torch of Torah values and not be swayed no matter how crazy society around us gets, and be able to be good, sensitive people who are sensitive to the plight of people around us, not just emotionally sensitive, but hopefully also able to help people and be good human beings. And with that, I would like to open the floor for any comments, thoughts that anyone might want to share, or questions. What do you say, Asaf? Picked you before, picking you again. Your camera is on, so I can do that.
Well, you've given some really good points there.
Food for thought. Food for thought.
Yeah, definitely.
Emily, I don't know how much you heard. Nice to see you.
Hi, Rabbi. Nice to see you. And hi, Asaf, and anyone else that I know on this call, and anyone I don't know on this call too. Miss you guys. Sorry I missed this. I actually really wanted to go, but I have my Kala classes at this time. So
You support the cause.
yeah. I don't have any, I guess like halakhically, is it okay to watch these shows and enjoy them? Like we watched it and I think I binged it in a full day. I don't think it makes me more like violent or.
You actually watched it twice.
I did. Okay, don't put me on blast. We're gonna leave now.
No, that's good. It means that you cared enough to spend time with your fiance when he was watching it and say, I watched it already, but for you as an act of dedication and sensitivity, which sensitivity is very good. So I was not suggesting that it's prohibited to watch. I was just giving a word of advice. We don't have to look closely at all the gory parts because they can have a desensitizing effect. So the study I was quoting does not suggest that it will cause you to become a more violent person, but that it does cause people to be less sensitive to people around them, which is counterproductive to what a lot of the mitzvahs are trying to make us do, which is learn how to become slightly more sensitive people. The example I brought was with the challah covers, but if you learn the laws of how you're supposed to give charity, for example,
Yeah.
It's all about, instead of focusing on whether this person's going to get the money that he needs, it's all about how you're going to give it to him and how you're going to, get into his mindset and empathize with him and feel for him, because we're supposed to develop and fine tune ourselves as more sensitive human beings. So just an important thing to be aware of, not to allow these kinds of shows to desensitize us.